Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Eden Road podcast. As I teased on yesterday's episode, today we're going to be doing a special one, reflecting on the new investment coming into Brentford. We had a couple of requests on social media to get someone on who actually knows what they're talking about when it comes to these kinds of things. So we've done just that. Kieran Maguire, football finance expert, host of the Price is Football podcast. Nice to see you again, Kieran. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Unfortunately, Swiss Rambo and Stefan Borson weren't available, so you've got me instead. But yeah,
Best,
always a
best of
pleasure.
the bunch.
Never. That's right. Best of the bad bunch.
Just before we get going, remember to drop a comment down below, subscribe to the YouTube and Spotify channels, follow us on the socials at the Eden Road on Twitter, at Eden Road Pod on Instagram. Kieran, I mentioned before we started recording, we put this out to our listeners, and we've got quite a few questions to get through. So I thought I'd go through a couple that I wanted to ask, a couple that we kind of talked about on yesterday's pod, and then we just kind of rattle through some of the questions that some of our listeners have sent in. But
Yeah.
I think the best place to start would be just for you to maybe kind of explain the ins and the outs of what's happened, what it means for Brentford, and or how much new investment Bees fans can expect to see maybe in the short term / long term.
Well, I mean, historically, the club has been owned by Matthew, who um, I'll probably get my Brighton season ticket cancelled mysteriously as a result of saying this. Who I think is the best, if not, he's certainly one of the best owners as far as the Premier League is concerned. Um, but he has, uh, he is a successful business to run. There's no doubt his emotional investment as well as his financial investment in the club has been very substantial, and I think he's now reached the stage where he feels that he wants to broaden the investment base, and it's been well known in, shall we say, circles that he's been looking for support on the back of that. And he's clearly happy with Vaughan and Lubner as the two minority partners. So they have put money into the club. There's Brentford Football Club, there's Best Intentions Analytics, there's a few other companies as well who have all announced share issues in the last 24 to 48 hours. Um, Brentford run a tight ship, so they were not short of money. You know, player sales, the player sale model has always been beneficial, and that's certainly when the club was in the Championship, that allowed the club to have operational losses in terms of week-to-week issues, and the player trading model helped the club not only on the pitch but also financially. We're now starting to see, having been in the Premier League a few seasons, Tony going last season, for example, is an opportunity to generate more money from player trading. But he probably feels he just doesn't want to go down the route of borrowing money from banks, which I absolutely understand. Probably feels that he's put in enough money himself and is looking for third-party investment. So this is part of, I think, of a broader strategy. And one of the things I like about Brentford is that they are a club that I can see that has a strategy, that they respond to issues rather than um, just have knee-jerk reactions.
In terms of that strategy, and it's something we touched on in yesterday's podcast, and maybe this isn't sort of appealing to your financial expertise too much, but we were kind of discussing why Benham has decided to do this and whether it could be part of a long term potentially exit strategy for him. What would you think about that?
Um, that's ultimately his call. I think he's so embedded into Brentford Football Club. It's part of his identity as a fan as well as an owner, that he would only go down that route if he honestly felt that it sounds cliched, but he'd taken the club as far as he could go, and therefore it needed substantial external funds, which he wasn't in a position to give. Um, I don't think Brentford are in that position myself. I mean, I don't know what, and then it comes down to you as a fan base. What are your ambitions? I always refer people back to Stoke City and Charlton, where both clubs finished sort of 7th or 8th in the Premier League for sort of 2 or 3 seasons. And there's a good reason for that, because the Big Six are known as the Big Six for a reason. And then sort of the fans started to get a bit angsty, saying, "Is this it? Can we go no further?"
Mm.
And in both those cases, the clubs tried to go. They tried to change the culture of the club. They tried to to change what was happening, shifting, going for a different player recruitment model, and so on. And Charlton have been bobbling down between the Championship in League One on a regular basis since that model failed. And Stoke City, despite being owned by Bet365, have spent what now 7 8 years, 7 years in the Championship and never finished higher than 14th. And they their owners are as rich, or not richer, well, if not richer than God. So uh, it, it it's a case now of trying to work out what the strategy is. I think one of the positive things about Brentford is that there are really good lines of communication and engagement between the club hierarchy and the fan base. Um, you might disagree. I'm saying this as an outsider. Um, and if they can say, well, we have to be realistic here. We're never going to have a budget, 166 million pounds of revenue, 114 million pounds of wages would always mean that we've effectively got a bottom six budget.
Mhm.
And therefore, what we're aiming to do is to outperform by being smarter and using the benefit of smart odds, using Matthew's board of directors who can bring in a variety of skills to outperform expectations.
In terms of those board of directors, I think one thing that will have Brentford fans potentially worried is the level of involvement from Matthew Vaughn and Gary Lubner. The statement from Brentford a couple of days ago read, Brentford will remain under the majority ownership of Benham and the day-to-day control of the club's leadership team, including chief exec John Varney, director of football Phil Giles, and chair Cliff Crown. I wanted to know how realistic that is. I don't know if I'm being stupid in asking the question, but it kind of just seems like we're asking a couple of people to pump a lot of money into the club and not have any say about the kind of day-to-day running of the club. How realistic is that?
I don't think they're getting. I don't they want to get involved in the day-to-day running of the club. They've got successful careers elsewhere.
Right.
What they might be able to do is to bring their skill set to particular areas. So Lubner is known as philanthropist. He it could be that he sees in Brentford what so many other people, including in myself, really admire about the club. In the sense that it hasn't gone down the full money route that we've seen elsewhere, and I think that's a really good thing. Um, as far as Vaughan is concerned, his background is in entertainment, as we know. Well, can he bring something to assist sort of the marketing of the club, um, rather than what I guess fans are concerned about? And let's face it, all we really care about is results
Mm-hmm.
and recruitment. Um, I can't see either of those individuals wanting to get involved, because they're going to say, right, we're really good at what we do on an individual basis. There's this guy Matthew Benham who has got a secret sauce at Smart Odds, which is one of the world's leading. We can't compete with that, so therefore, why should we try to compete with this? And therefore, the football side of the business, and it is a business, we have to acknowledge that. I don't think there'll be any negative implications there. It will be more to do with, can we expand, horrible word, can we expand Brentford as a brand? Can we make the club more acknowledged, perhaps on an international, on a global basis, through association with these individuals? And I think there's a positive there, because if that is the case, it brings more money into the club. Therefore, indirectly, it's helping the budget. and it's helping the owners because more money coming in can only assist in terms of the valuation of Brentford as a business, and it would appear that the valuation is around about £400 million in total. Looking at these minority stakes, which I crunched my numbers on that. That works out around about 2.4 times the annual revenue. Newcastle went for 2 times their revenue 4 years ago. I think we have seen inflation in football, so I think it's a fair price. It's not. I think it's a realistic price as well for Brentford. And I've got to say this because we always have to say Brentford as a Premier League football club.
Mhm.
Where the Premier League's going in 4 years' time, I don't know. We've just seen the Club World Cup, and we've seen the dollar signs in the eyes of Infantino, Todd Bowley, and also the usual suspects at that end of the Premier League. Let me be perfectly blunt. They don't want Brentford in the Premier League
Mhm.
because you don't bring anything to them. They want ideally a 16-team Premier League. They'll probably begrudgingly accepting an 18-team Premier League. And this will allow them to attend the Club World Cup once every 2 years. They want an expanded Champions League every season, where the Premier League will have 5 or 6 clubs, and you know who all those 5 or 6 clubs are. And I think that's a much broader battle for. I'm sounding melodramatic here. The soul of the game.
It's
And
not,
for
it's not
me,
melodramatic.
Brentford are part of the soul. Yeah, the achievements. And I'm a Brighton fan. Yeah, we've been through similar.
Mhm.
And we both know that there's bad blood at certain levels, but there's also an awful lot of mutual admiration at other levels.
I do see a bit of a gangster storyline developing between Matthew Benham and Tony Bloom potentially. We could get that in the works with Matthew Vaughn and his expertise in that area. That would be quite a fun film to make. You mentioned what fans care about. We care about results on the pitch. We care about the recruitment policy, etc. In terms of this new investment, and in terms of investment into clubs in general, how long does it normally take to see that investment translated on the pitch? Because I think what people really want to know, especially like when you get this kind of news, the first thing you're thinking is this the start of Brentford potentially pushing up the table? And I think a lot of our listeners will be interested to know whether you think it's more they're coming in for the commercial aspect or the sponsorship aspect, or whether that money is going to be put to use quickly on the pitch.
Um, I don't think Brentford are a club that make quick decisions. They will have lined up their recruitment strategy for this summer, for for winter 26 and summer 26 on the basis that that they're a Premier League club, but I know they also have a secondary budget as well. Should that not be the case? Um, Looking at the figures I've got in front of me, they don't need additional money. That they've not borrowed from Matthew for some time. That they have effectively been quite sustainable whilst being in the Premier League. So a bit of extra money could help in terms of cash flow for items, but yeah, I say if they're buying 10 to 20% of the club, that's 40 or 50 million. That 40 to 50 million pounds is nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in terms of Premier League, if we take a look at the club's spending in the Premier League seasons to date, it's been pretty modest: 42, 55, 58 million. And what they've done, they've bought well. So, and I think why have they bought well? Because they've used the smart odds model. We saw Ipswich spend 140 million pounds last season, and not being rude, but they they didn't contribute to the Premier League very much. Effectively, Southampton spent a lot of money. Leicester didn't spend as much money, but ironically, I've just come off a Leicester podcast similar to yours, trying to explain why, and it's due to the fact that the owner had run out of money. Potentially. So I don't think that this should be an issue. If Brentford fans want to fish in a different pond in terms of the fees that they're paying for players. I don't think that will be the case. You'll still there is a Brentford fee
Yeah.
range, which and could you get an extra 2 or 3? Could you be going for a £28 million player instead of £25 million player? Perhaps. I think realistically, you're not going to be spending more than 30 million on anyone in the market. Are you going to double that? I would be very, very surprised. It simply goes against the grain of how the club operates.
So we were talking about it on the pod yesterday because we recently did bid 35 million for Amari Hutchinson. Speaking of Ipswich,
Mm, mm.
and we were talking about it on the pod, and we were like, well, these are the kind of fees that we don't expect with Brentford, because our record transfer fee is just over 30 million, or maybe just under 30 million pounds for Igor Thiago. But we were kind of discussing whether, now that we have that new investment, maybe these figures are going to be something that we see more frequently. But it's interesting to hear you say that even despite that new investment, we're going to still follow the same model in sort of picking up undervalued players, making them better, and then potentially selling them on for more. Should we get into some questions, because there are many
Sure.
to get through. We got Leif
Sure.
Pedersen on Twitter asking, is it new money or have they bought shares from Benham? If it is new money, what kind of investment should we expect? Leif actually DM'd me and proposed that the new investors in the short term would look more at commercial revenue through sponsorship and or increasing matchday revenue via something like a stadium expansion, as opposed to investment in the playing squad. So I don't know what you think about that. First of all, is it new money or have they bought shares from Benham?
Well, they've issued some new shares. The club has issued shares. We saw that at Company's House a couple of days ago. It wasn't a huge amount, but I think they've invested more in this best investments analytics company. I think it looked like about 40 million going into there, of which some of that has funneled through to Brentford. So it could be that Matthew has taken an element of it, and the club will have had a part of that as well. As for how it's going to be spent, ultimately that's a boardroom decision. Is there scope? I love the GTEC. I love it as an away fan. I was very fortunate to be invited to into the boardroom for Brentford versus Brighton last season to see Yao Pedro's final moment as a Brighton player.
Commiserations.
Deservedly, yes, yeah. I think I'm one of the very few that is gutted that he's going. Chelsea have got a bargain.
Yeah.
If he can keep his elbows down.
They keep getting bargains from you, Kieran.
Yeah. Tell me about it. Um, but he's a brilliant. Without wanting to talk to him, he's a brilliant footballer. I don't think he's the smartest. If I was going to pick a fight with another player in my team, I wouldn't pick it with a 6'4" Dutch centre half. Which
he,
is why he never played for us again. He got involved in a scrap with
we played you guys at the
Arteta.
Amex, and he tried to elbow one
Yeah,
of our players. Do you remember that?
yeah,
I know.
yeah,
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 he's
yeah, yeah,
definitely got a bit of red mist. Definitely got a bit of red
yeah.
mist.
But where's the money going? Is there scope to increase the GTEC in terms of not having to do a major restructuring? Because I know when the Amex was built, we looked at one of the stands. We go, that looks a bit strange, and it turns out that they initially had approval for 21,000, and then over the next summer, like, they just stuck a little slide on it and boosted it from 21 to 28. So I don't know whether you've got that ability. If it involves a structural rechange, I'm not certain that you're going to get a return on investment in the short term. So I would imagine sort of other initiatives, perhaps focusing more on the commercial side, and also, Matthew has lent money to the club, so he deserves at some point in time to take that money back. Could an element of that be going back to him? We'll have to wait and see. And some will go to help day-to-day cash flow, and therefore indirectly that helps the playing budget.
Leaf also asked what Brentford's PSR status was before the transaction, and if anything has changed.
As far as the PSR is concerned, looking at these results over the last 3 years, Brentford had an overall profit of 30 million. You're allowed to lose 105, and then you've got your adjustments for infrastructure, women's team, academy, and so on. So Brentford were in an incredibly strong PSR position, and they remain in an incredibly strong PSR position. I'm always a little bit concerned when fans say, well, let's go to the limit for PSR. I think that's a very dangerous strategy. It's the equivalent, and I have had experience of this, of my wife saying, "You've got a new the Amex have just put your credit card limit up to 30,000. Let's go to 30,000." And I'm going, no, let's go to zero. No, um, a limit should not be a target because it's a limit in terms of losing money. So I don't think there's been any negative connotations as a result of this. I think Brentford continue to be a club which will have a fairly strict budget, and could be a marginal loosening in the sense of, you were talking about Hutchinson 35 million. I don't want to bore Brentford fans with tales of Brighton, but we thought that Brighton's limit was 30 million, and all of a sudden they signed Jorginho for 40. And then the club was very, very quick to say, don't expect this again.
Right.
We're going back into our lane. This was an exceptional opportunity. So the extra money, if Brentford identify a player for 40 million, could they do that as a one-off? Yes, they could. And then I think they go back to what you were saying earlier, like in terms of, we see our model as talent spotting, talent identification, giving players the opportunity to play for Brentford. And we don't want them to leave, but if they do leave, we know that we will do well out of it.
We have David Strutton on Twitter asking, what is the value of the investment and what percentage will each investor have? I think you may have already answered that percentage. It's 25% stake, isn't it? Or 20% stake?
Yes, it looks around about that. I must confess, I don't have those entire figures to hand, but it is very much a minority stake.
Okay.
And it means that Matthew is able to dictate decision making. And I've often used this phrase: the best club owner is what I refer to as a benevolent dictator, in the sense that if you take a look at a club such as Rangers in Scotland, they've had a few crises. There's no denying that, and they've had a lot of problems. And then effectively a consortium of shareholders came together to put funding into the club. And then they started squabbling amongst themselves, which in my view has held the club back. And then over the course of this summer, or a few months ago, they've now been acquired. San Francisco 49ers effectively now have 51%. So having somebody who is a visionary in terms of the club, has a strategy, and is able to therefore push those decisions through, because some of the guys at Rangers wanted course A and some of them wanted course B, and they're all squabbling. You've seen similar issues at Crystal Palace, which and even as a Brighton fan, I've got a huge amount of sympathy for Palace fans in the mess that's ended up, and everybody's saying it's such and such fault. Yeah, for me, it's a governance and professionalism issue, which shouldn't impact upon which competition you're playing. But yeah, that UEFA clearly disagree. So yeah, I think they've got 20%. That means that they've got a voice at the table, but they can be outvoted as well.
Joe Hales on Twitter asking, I think it's a really interesting question. In comparison to the Championship/early Premier League days, how reliant are Brentford on outgoing transfer fees as opposed to commercial/TV revenue?
Far less. If we take a look at the numbers, about 88% of Brentford's revenue comes from broadcasting deal. Sorry, 77%. I was just checking it here. 77% comes from the broadcasting deal. So that means that they don't have to sell players. The fact that they lost £8 million in 23-24, and that's to be expected. And the reason for this, and my numbers are rough and ready. But when Brentford were first promoted to the Premier League, the average weekly wage went up from 19 grand to 31. So their first season in the Premier League, players on an average of 30 grand a week, or around about that. And that was by far the lowest in the Premier League that season. So what did the players and their representatives do? They go knocking at Cliff's door, and they say, "Look, we've proven ourselves to be Premier League standard players. Why are you paying us the 20th lowest wages or 20th highest wages?" And the club would say, "Yeah." So they gave an awful lot of players enhanced contracts. So the wage bill went from 30 grand a week to 45 grand a week in the second season. You've proven yourself in the second season. Boys, we've been in the Premier League 2 years. We want another pay rise. So based on my figures, and of course, you're bringing in players who have got expectations of a Premier League wage, and the average Premier League wage is probably sort of 65 to 70. So the wage bill went up from 30 to 45 to probably mid 50s, or low to mid 50s, 52, 53. So as a result of that, the income has actually stayed the same in each of the seasons. It goes up slightly, but the big issues of TV money are broadly the same. Your costs have gone up, and that's why we've seen Brentford start to lose money. So having a little bit of money coming in from player sales is beneficial, but it's not crucial. Can you go 2 seasons without a big sale? Yes, you can.
Well, we might get a few this summer, to be fair. I mean, got
Yeah.
Mbumo. I've just seen an Ornstein tweet about Wissa as well, potentially. So potentially some big player sales coming in this summer. We've got a couple more, Kieran, on Brentford in this new investment specifically, and then we do have a couple just on football in general. But I'll get through the Brentford ones first. Sarah from Bias is asking if Benham has sold some of his own shares to new investors in addition to issuing the new ones. Would we know about that now, or will we have to wait until the accounts / other documents are filed at Company's House?
I mean, the club might choose to make an announcement. Doesn't have to. No obligation to do so. At Company's House, there's something called a confirmation statement. That is effectively an annual update as to who owns what in Brentford FC, and therefore you'd find out from there. But take a look at say Best Intentions Analytics. That's the company which is worth inspecting.
Well, she asked about that as well in this second question. They also have issued new shares for the holding company Best Intentions Analytics. What would be the reason for the new investors buying shares in both Best Intentions Analytics and Brentford?
Yeah, it's a weird one. It could be that Best Intentions Analytics is buying shares in Brentford,
right,
in order to bring more money from the holding company down into the subsidiary itself.
Right, okay.
Which puts monies into yeah.
Okay, perfect.
We should be talking jumpers for goalposts. We should be talking VAR. Well, why are we talking this nonsense?
Yeah, okay. Well, we've got some more. Well, I say more football-based questions, but we've got Richard Mandugal asking on YouTube: is qualifying for the Europa Conference League actually worth it financially? And I think I've heard you speak about this on the overlap potentially, but I'd be interested to get your thoughts on it now.
Okay, if you qualify, if I think it was Fiorentina won it in 2024. They made £17 million in prize money for winning the Europa Conference. By the time you look at the additional investment in players, because you're playing Sunday, Thursday, so you need a bigger squad. By the time you take into consideration the bonuses for players, by the time you take into account that you'll probably finish 3 positions below where you would have finished in the Premier League because of the additional demands. Because I remember I was listening to Sean Dyche saying that at Burnley, you played a match at the weekend, players came in on a Monday or a Tuesday, and you started going through your drills for the match the following weekend. And you did your drills on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And I'm not saying it was a robotic football club, but Burnley played the Burnley style of football, and they did spectacularly well to effectively fight against the odds under Sean Dyche when he was at Burnley. The season they got into Europe was an absolute disaster, because you play a match on a Sunday because you're in the equivalent of the conference. Monday was a recovery day. Tuesday, you probably have to have a couple of plans against for your Thursday match. You fly out on Wednesday or Thursday morning. You got your match on a Thursday. You get back to Manchester Airport potentially 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning on a Friday. So therefore, there's no training on the Friday. The players come in for Saturday, and it's light training and a couple of drills, and then you've got a Premier League match on the Sunday. So that has an impact upon your Premier League performance. And every Premier League position is worth £3.5 million in prize money. So if you drop 3 positions, that's £10.5 million. So you take that off your 17 million for winning the competition. You're down to £7 million. You need your bigger squad. You've got the cost for attending the competition. I was at lunch with a Premier League club, wasn't Brentford, and they said, the finance director says, I can't be seen being quoted on this, and I absolutely understand it. But for me, am I allowed to swear?
Of course, yeah, swear away.
Okay. He said, for me, Europa Conference is a fucking nightmare.
Yeah.
It's for the fans. But for us, as a club, you know, we've got additional logistics costs, because we've now got to plan where we're going to stay. So you send out 2 or 3 members of staff. You need to book hotels. You need to look at airports. You need to look at how we're going to get from the airport to the ground. You have all of these things, additional costs being incurred. The financial benefits are zero, or in fact negative. You've got it is great for the fans, but having done Brighton's European tour a couple of years ago, which will live for me for the rest of my life. If they never qualify again, I'll be gutted, sort of. But I always say it's a bit like running a marathon. If anybody that's ever run a marathon will say this, I hated it. But you can never take it away from me. I'm now a marathon runner. I've now seen my side play in Europe, and as a Brentford fan, I wish the same for you. Genuinely, it's a fantastic experience. But even so, you've got the fans who need looking after. So it's ticket, announcing tickets. Are we going to have a new kit for Europe? Are we going to do this? So it puts extra strains on the club. There is no financial benefit in the Europa Conference at all, unless you win it and you therefore qualify for the Europa League the following season. And even in Europe, if again we look at the 2024 figures, it was who won it? Was it Dusseldorf won it in? I can't remember who won it in 2024. They made around about 41, 42 million euro. Now, an English team would probably get closer to 50, but then you've got to subtract all of these costs. So it makes money. You don't make money in the conference, full stop. You'll probably make money. You'll break even if you get to the quarterfinals. If you get to the semis or the final, you might make a bit of money. But if you win it, great, you qualify for the Champions League. As we saw with Spurs, I mean that was a £100 million match, and
So
also perhaps the worst European game I've ever seen.
It was. So just to confirm, is qualifying for the Europa Conference League actually worth it financially? That is a no. Correct?
That's a no. It's for the fans, and that's good, because Iceland on a Thursday night. Do it.
We have a couple of questions around PSR relating to women's teams, as I'm sure you've been asked 100 times over the last few months. Both questions from J. Billy P and Chris Richards on Twitter, both asking questions around clubs selling the women's teams back to themselves. Who else can do it? Why is it being allowed to happen?
It's being allowed to happen because it's within the Premier League rulebook. As far as the valuations are concerned, it's effectively a bit like selling an academy player on steroids, in the sense that in Chelsea's accounts, the women's team was valued at, I think it was £1.3 million, and they sold it for 200 million. So that transformed their PSR position. Could it be outlawed? Because it's outlawed. You wouldn't be able to do that you're not allowed to do that for UEFA purposes. But then UEFA's equivalent of PSR, those rules have been designed by UEFA rather than the clubs. In the Premier League, the PSR rules, you're effectively marking your own homework. And my understanding, again, having sort of had the ear to the ground, is that clubs are saying, well, given that Chelsea have got away with it, and I think that is the phrase to use because it's within the rules, why can't we? It's a get out of jail free card. So let's say that, and this isn't going to happen. Let's say that Matthew Benham decides he's going to sell the club to a mysterious multi-billionaire or a sovereign wealth fund, and they want to go and spend £300 million on players next year. You sell the women's team to yourself. You sell the training ground to yourself, and so on. You book those as profits, and you use those as a vehicle to invest in players. I mean, Chelsea spent in one window, in one season, as it was 22, 23, £745 million on signings. That's more than Brentford Football Club have done in the whole existence of the club, more than twice over.
Mm-hmm. Insane. just insane.
Yeah.
I made a video on TikTok, and it incurred the wrath of many angry Chelsea fans when I made a video about this. And I've decided not to talk about PSR on TikTok anymore, Kieran, because it can just get me into all sorts of trouble. Yeah, no, I don't
you have to direct me to it.
Well, I failed to mention the player sales, but I took a kind of. I just basically was saying that the PSR in its current state isn't fit for purpose. If you can do stuff like this,
absolutely. I'm with you entirely.
Yeah.
And I'm suddenly, when it first came out, and I'm not bigging myself up here because I'm just a teacher, but one of the things that I teach is creative accounting.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote down 10 ways of getting around PSR, or FFP as it's known in those days, and all I've done since is just tick them off. And I'm thinking, well, if I can come up with 10 schemes, and I'm just a stroppy, sullen teacher.
You're doing yourself a disservice, Kieran. You're not just a stroppy, sullen teacher. Come on.
Can you imagine the great minds of legal practices and the big four accounting firms? They'll have an absolute field day with this, and they've had an absolute field day. And the reason why I'm stroppy and sullen is I should have been selling these ideas 10 or 15 years ago. And of course, I just said, oh, well, they'll just do this. And of course, yeah, they've gone and done it. And then KPMG will charge them 50 grand for the same.
Final one, Kieran. I thought I'd ask you, how are you feeling about Brighton? Start of the season, impressed with Herzl's debut campaign?
I love him to bits. Although, we had a bit of a rough patch where Brighton lost at home to Everton, and then there was the Forest match. And I went there. Okay, we lost 7-0. Sometimes things just work out. The XG on that match was 3-1 to Forest. So Forest deserve to win? Absolutely. They were better than us. But everything turned to gold. And since then, I think a fairly sizable proportion of the fan base want him to go because, frankly, they're idiots and they don't understand how football works. There's far too much emphasis on the manager. And one of the things that exists, I think, both at Brighton and at Brentford, is that you ignore the table and you look at the underlying data.
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of fans who, and I understand where they're coming from. They've won the Champions League with Brighton on Championship Manager on quite a few occasions, and therefore they consider themselves to be authorities, have taken the view that he doesn't deserve to be a manager. We last season, Brighton beat Liverpool, Brighton beat Manchester City. They did the double over Spurs. They did the double over Manchester United. They beat Chelsea twice in a week. They beat Newcastle twice, and they drew twice with Arsenal. And you listen to them, and you think we just about avoided going into the National League. Yeah, it's bizarre, but that's going back to what I was saying to you earlier. Be careful what you wish for. Now that Brighton have sort of established themselves as a middle class club in the Premier League, it's all, we need to go to the next level, and they don't know what they're talking about, and they don't know how much it costs to go to this mythical next level. So yeah, I'm really impressed by Hertzler. I love the fact that he will be seen cycling around Brighton on a Tuesday afternoon. He's a very intense guy. I think he's an intelligence guy. I don't care that he's 32. Yeah, if I've been doing my, if I go to a doctor or a dentist and they say, yeah, I started medical school at 18 and been doing this for 14 years. Okay, yeah, okay, mate, you've earned your stripes. So the obsession with his age, I find bizarre. Yeah, I really like him. I think they've recruited interestingly over the summer. Yeah, we've gone for some couple of Greek teenagers and a young lad from Sunderland as well. And again, they've sold players at big profits in Pedro and Adringa. And what's happening to Ferguson, nobody knows. I mean, I've never seen a player goes to such a cliff edge in terms of form and expectation. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the season.
And just finally, an outside perspective on Brentford, what have you made of Thomas Frank's departure, Keith Andrews, set piece coach coming in? It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on it, because I think it's fair to say we've seesawed quite a bit. I think we're all feeling a little bit more confident now. What about you?
I would say Matthew Benham made that decision in conjunction with his senior management team colleagues. They've got a fair amount of credit in the bank, because let's face it, who was Thomas Frank before he became your first team coach? Give Keith Andrew a chance. He's a nice guy. He's a bright guy, and I wish him well. He's an ex-Brighton player.
Is he? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. There's a link. Kieran, that was absolutely fantastic, mate. Always love sitting down and chatting to you. The Ealing Road podcast will be back imminently. There is so much going on at the moment. No summer break, it's looking like for us, but we'll be back whenever the next bit of news drops. And if we're going on anything that's happened over the last few weeks, it will be very soon. Remember to drop a comment down below with your thoughts around the new investment. Subscribe to the YouTube and Spotify channels. Follow us on the socials at the Ealing Road on Twitter, at Ealing Road Pod on Instagram. Kieran, an absolute pleasure, mate. Thank you so much for jumping on the pod again.
Thank you very much. Up the bees.